This is the second part of a 5-part series summarizing some of the ideas and themes I developed in this sefer. Try to look for meaning, look for faith, look for strength and courage as we navigate unprecedented, a trauma, a crisis. We're still facing the clouds of uncertainty, the dark clouds of uncertainty in our future. In the first year, I described the Chilul Hashem of October 7th, the symbolic Chilul Hashem, that the people of Hashem were savagely attacked in the land of Hashem, and the attack was about our rights to the land of Hashem, and the attack occurred on Shabbos, Simchas Torah. And I started to describe that the Chilul Hashem of October 7th wasn't just metaphoric because we represent Hashem in his land and it was Shabbos, but Hashem is being challenged in this world. Hashem's presence is being directly challenged by religious charlatans, by religious imposters who dress like they're religious, who speak as if they're religious, who try to pass themselves off as religious figures. But they speak about a God who doesn't exist, and denying the traits of Hashem is tantamount to denying his presence, and casting God as angry and arbitrary and desirous of blood and lust and revenge, and that innocent should suffer. That is a complete sabotage of Hashem's presence in our world, and we have to be able to see through that facade. These are heretics and atheists who are dressing up as religious personalities. In this year, I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into some of the details, the religious differences between the culture of Islamic fundamentalism that we're battling and our culture. Prior to 2001, September 11, 2001, there was a book written. It was actually written before, it was published right after. As you know, books have to be written a year in advance, except for this, which was written over the last 6 months. It was published by a Middle Eastern historian named Bernard Lewis. Bernard Lewis wrote the book entitled What Went Wrong? And in his book, he poses a fascinating question. How did Islam, which had enjoyed such cultural supremacy in mathematics, in philosophy, in culture, military, economically, how did it abdicate its supremacy? How did it lose its pole position in human history, which is the product of so much Islamic rage? In the end, their paranoia of the West, their hatred to the West, is based on the sense that the West has colonized. And when I say colonized, I don't just mean territorially, but has invaded them, stripped them of their culture, dominated them with their technology. And he offers some very cogent ideas, cultural, scientific, technological. As a religious person, I found myself asking his question, what went wrong, but answering it from a religious standpoint. Avraham Avinu, the founder of monotheism, of healthy monotheism, not fake monotheism like Islamic fundamentalism, Avraham Avinu was the first to discover that Hashem was merciful and compassionate. For 2,000 years, humanity assumed that gods were grotesque figures in heaven who toyed with their human playthings for sport. All they had seen were expulsions, population dispersal, floods, punishments. Because of the moral collapse, because of the theological mayhem, Avram saw religious, moral spirit. He saw a God who cared, who wanted life, who desired prosperity. And he changed the face of God in our world. And he bequeathed, he endowed all those who would follow in his path with an image of Hashem as a caring, compassionate, loving, kind, merciful. Kel Melech Yosef Al Kisei Rachamim. And when I look at my world and I see suffering, starvation, limitation, inconvenience, I want to re-landscape that world in Hashem's image, because Hashem does not want human beings to suffer. Hashem does not want human beings to die. So for Jews and for those who follow Abraham's monotheistic impulse, the march of science, technology, and the improvement of the human condition is driven by a religious echo to make this world, to change this world, to create heaven on earth, or an earth that resembles the kingdom of heaven. And what happens, I found myself asking, to a culture or an ideology such as Islamic fundamentalism that portrays God as angry and full of ire and vengeful and hateful, and when people suffer and when people die, there's no religious motive or religious impetus to try to alleviate that suffering or to try to protect life, because God himself is arbitrary. God himself celebrates loss of life. And that is part of this battleground. Is God the God of, excuse me for saying this, Allah Akbar where when people die, they're handing out sweets and there's joy in heaven. There's no joy when innocent people die. And it's impossible to know who's innocent and who's not. Obviously, the reports of the soldiers finding arms, finding Hamas material, finding tunnels in almost every home. It's hard to know whether those figures of how many civilians, innocent civilians, unfortunately, but there are many who have died, and we're not happy about it. We can't change our policy. We have to defeat those who are our murderers, who are stalking us. And sometimes, unfortunately, that's their game plan, to try to manipulate innocent people and put them in harm's way, to try to solicit false public mercy and to halt our attempts to defend ourselves. But there's no joy when people who are Tzelem Elokim, people who are children of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, suffer. And that it's so abrasive and it's so jolting to hear the way they describe the God of death and the God of blood and the God of injustice and the God of revenge. That is not HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the second difference is, and it's an extension of the first difference, is not how you see God, but as an extension, do you create a culture which pursues death, a culture which has a death wish, a culture which celebrates shahidism, a culture. Our view of the Mekadesh Hashem is not to pursue death. The pasuk to describe the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, V'nikdashti b'soch b'nei Yisrael. What does it mention? Death. V'yavtas Hashem elokecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol miyodecha. It became interpreted. This is a pasuk that we're supposed to love Hashem and pursue a life of avodas Hashem as passionately and as selflessly as we can. And of course, during the moments that, or in this context in which we have to defend Hashem with our lives, so that's just indicative of whether we're selflessly dedicated to Hashem. If we're not willing to surrender our lives, then we care about ourselves more than we care about Hashem. But we're not looking for death. We're not pursuing death. Kiddush Hashem is not about death. It's about life. It's b'chai bohem. It's v'nikdashti b'soch b'nei Yisrael. If we face, again, those situations, and if we're not willing to sacrifice our lives, then it reveals that we weren't living for Hashem in the first place. And this is the second battle of ideas, a culture of death versus a culture of life, a culture that celebrates shahidism. We don't celebrate it. And to me, the differences were very stark. When I read the letters of soldiers who wrote letters to their family before they entered battle, and unfortunately, sadly, sometimes those letters were read at their funerals, and the letters were so, I can't even say them in the same sentence, that's how different they were, so different than the film clips that these terrorists, murderers film before they go out homicidally to kill as many people as they can. So they're not letters about me getting to the next world and getting their 72 virgins and going to paradise. They're letters about the beauty of life, about the meaning of life, urging their parents to continue celebrating life, and in some cases, to continue celebrating life even after these children no longer returned, and finding meaning and purpose in life. And those sacred, holy letters that celebrated life, that spoke to us from beyond the grave, from Shemayim, after people had already left this world, were so reflective of our culture and how much we value life, and those who have sacrificed their life on behalf of a culture that wants to advance life and improve life, not just for ourselves, but for those who can, in this world, who can see past their hatred and try to be the beneficiaries of whatever prosperity we want to try to share in this world. And the notion that you can enter the next world by committing murder in this world, that's your ticket of entry to get to the next world. We don't murder to get to the next world. We live a life that's godlike, based on his will and his mitzvos and his commandments and his morals, and that is our ticket to the next world. It's not even a next world, it's a continuation of this world. It's an extension of this world. To get to Olam Haba, you have to build it in this earth, in this world. So that's the second ideological battleground, not just how Hashem's being presented, a God of mercy or a God of anger and vengeance, but is it a culture that pursues death, celebrates death, that advances and endorses death, or it's a culture that's firmly pivoted on life, and a life led, dedicated to the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if you're dedicated, I always tell Talmidim, sometimes they ask me what passion is. To say passion means you care about something more than yourself, that you have passion for something, you live beyond yourself. And if you're really passionate about something and you care about it more than yourself, you have to be willing to die for it, or else you don't really care about it more than yourself. So we don't wish for death, we don't pursue death. But if we care about things more than ourselves, our people, our country, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, our family, then if push comes to shove, we have to be willing to give our lives for that, because then we're more selfish than selfless. And the third offset, the third tension, it's a much more subtle one. And it's something that hit us hard with those images of mutilation of bodies, of cutting up body parts. And I don't even want to describe the images. Everyone listening to this knows. And the way that even after death, bodies were abused, and the contrast between that and the care and the tenderness and the delicate nature by which our Zaka volunteers and our people who were involved in Zihui Gufa, which is identification. And most people don't even know half of the story, because these are not things we publicize. These are things we keep quiet and private. The hours and hours of work and the scenes that these Zaka workers and others who were involved, the scenes that they were exposed to, they will change these people forever. Not just the people who gathered bodies under fire, but the people who collected the bodies and the mutilated corpses, and just the moral price they're going to pay, and the toxicity that entered their minds and their imaginations. And it's hard to describe. It's hard to describe that contrast. We believe in Tselem Elokim, not just as a moral value, but as a theological principle. There's an organization in Eretz Yisrael called B'Tselem that tries to defend human rights and whatever. It's a left-leaning organization, but in our imagination, the word Tselem Elokim, the concept of Tselem Elokim, has become equated with moral crusade, social justice, social equality. And of course, that's one expression of Tselem Elokim. But the concept of Tselem Elokim, of divine image, runs much more deeply, much deeper. Hashem is different from this world. He's not part of nature. That's how we reject pantheism. He's apart from the material world. He's apart from reality. He created reality. And in creating a being like himself, he created a being that was different from the world around it. And we are that being. And he endowed us with difference. It's like he's different. That's what Tselem Elokim means literally. He's apart, we're apart. Our apartness manifests itself in all the constituent details of Tselem Elokim: intelligence, intelligent communication, creativity, imagination, emotions, consciousness, dreams, relationships. Whatever we have, the animal kingdom doesn't enjoy. But it's just a bundle or a cluster of differences. We are different, we are apart. And that's why we respect human beings who are apart from this world and most resemble HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we respect their lives, we respect their identities, and we respect their bodies even after they die, because Tselem Elokim doesn't just define our souls, it also defines the body that Hashem crafted delicately to house our souls in our time on this earth. And by desecrating Tselem Elokim, they're desecrating and they're defiling the notion that we are like Hashem and we are different, and the ramifications and the connotations of desecrating Tselem Elokim, of desecrating human dignity, of not realizing this creature that Hashem created. They'll ripple across a culture. There's no respect for humanity, no respect for law, no respect for progress, no desire to improve the human condition. These are the three ideas that are under fire after October 7th, that are part of this ideological battle alongside the military battle. Number one, is Hashem angry or is he merciful? Does he desire suffering or does he desire welfare? Number two, is it a culture that pursues death? Death for others, death for itself, that celebrates death, that wields death as a tool? Or is it a culture that preserves, protects life, and death just being a price that sometimes you pay for your passion? Number three, do we recognize and respect, glorify, and preserve human beings as the creature most like Hashem, gifted with capacity to change this world, or do we desecrate?